Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Stephen Greer, and welcome to our YouTube channel. It's a very special event regarding plans that the Disclosure Project is making that I think you will be very interested in hearing. I'm very privileged to have on with us an attorney, Derek Garcia. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Dr. Greer. It's very good to be here.
And Derek was a young student when he got involved with what we were doing with the Disclosure Project back in 2000, 2001. I think you were at Wesleyan, if I remember correctly. And he since has become an attorney doing public interest law generally, I believe, and has helped us with some matters over the years. And he's just a wonderful person. And he is heading up an effort that is history making in many ways. I first want to just introduce the idea of why we're going to do this in a moment. But first, Derek, if you could just tell everyone, your background and how you got involved, and just a little bit about yourself, would be great.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Derek Garcia. I'm a civil rights attorney from New Mexico. I've been in practice approximately 13 years, both in state and federal courts. Admitted to practice in both the Federal District of New Mexico as well as the United States Courts of Appeals for the 10th Circuit and the United States Supreme Court. And I've done a variety of plaintiffs' civil rights cases surrounding constitutional law, search and seizure cases brought under the Fourth Amendment, in addition to a variety of criminal defense, environmental law, and intellectual property law as well as related to this subject. And it's great to be here, and I look forward to speaking about our upcoming legal efforts.
Right. So the big announcement here, as you see from the headline on this YouTube breaking news, is that for some time, since the late 1990s, I've spoken with constitutional attorneys since before Mr. Garcia was actually an attorney, about the civilian application of the RICO statute. So RICO stands for Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization. And it was put in place some decades ago as a way to pursue, or obviously, racketeering, corrupt organization, referring to criminal organizations, crime families, and things of this sort. But in a sense, all criminal conspiracies that fall under certain categories. It was mentioned to me back in the 1990s that, in fact, the late 1990s, that the criminal conduct of the organizations who are running covert programs related to UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence and their associated technologies would fall under this statute. And that at some point, a civilian group could organize and then initiate, without the federal government doing so initially, a civilian RICO action, meaning that we, the Disclosure Project, and all of us would begin a process to prosecute, in a sense, or sue in a civilian application that's allowed by law of the RICO statute, the major corporations and the government agencies that have illegally run projects since the late 1950s. And that then this would open the door for us to be able to involve under oath testimony, depositions, subpoenas, and to enter into sites that have been run illegally. The key point here is that we would have to prove, which we can do now through testimony and information we have, that both corporate and agencies within the US government have run these projects without the oversight of the president and approval, or the Congress, which is required by law. And therefore, they are criminal activities and organizations, and that they run the gamut from murder, kidnapping, drug running, embezzlement of federal funds, and a host of other major felonies. So we have known this for a very long time. And in conversations recently with Mr. Garcia, we've concluded that we need to begin that process. And so we are announcing and making a call for attorneys as well as other supporters to assist us in this effort. So Derek, if you want to just go a little more into, since you're a lawyer, you certainly know the statutes better than I do. I wanted to give people sort of the big picture of what we're doing and the foundation for it. The foundation of it, again, is that we can prove in a federal court that these programs have been run illegally and unconstitutionally and have engaged in criminal behavior. I should add, in the last 2 months, I have had multiple top secret whistleblowers who have had witness tampering, intimidation, threats that have been pushed their way. So this is another crime to add to the other list. There's a very long list of criminal activity which we would claim and actually could prove in a court of law.
That's precisely right. From everything, and I've seen from your work over the years, is that we have more than enough evidence at this point to prove in a court of law that this illegal enterprise, this corrupt organization exists and has existed for a number of decades. And not only that, has been involved in what the law defines as racketeering activity, a long list of enumerated crimes, which we are empowered through the Racketeering, Influenced, and Corrupt Organization Act of 1970 to
Right.
essentially enforce civilly through the federal court system, through force of civil law. The initial intention, the law was created in 1970 to prevent union busting and sort of organized crime activity from taking over, democratic practices and electing, union representatives and that sort of thing. But in this context, in the biggest story of human history, which the Disclosure Project represents, I think it can be used effectively to essentially civilly prosecute a number of enumerated crimes, which we can prove in a court of law that this racketeering, influenced, corrupt organization has participated in for a number of years. The only standing requirement that I can see from the law and my familiarity in practice in this area is that a citizen must bring a civil action under the RICO Act if the organization or the individual has been harmed in some way by the corrupt and criminal organization's illegal activities. And from everything that I know from your work over the past 30 years in this area, we certainly meet that definition. And so this is a call for a national call to action and invitation to begin the process of assembling a multi-jurisdictional legal team in which we will bring attorneys together of all sorts of different experience areas, practice areas, in order to pursue these claims in federal court across various jurisdictions, as well as to gain access to some of the unacknowledged special access projects that we are familiar with, and to act on the actionable intelligence that you have already provided the members of Congress for decades now. So it's a very exciting time, and we're doing this call out for anyone with experience in constitutional law, national security, foreign relations, space law and policy, intelligence, security clearances, related legal matters, any sort of Whistleblower Protection Act statutes and enforcement of that area of law, RICO actions, including the civilian enforcement of the criminal code, legislative law and policies surrounding the National Defense Authorization Act of 2023, includes the current Pentagon efforts to study the UAP phenomena, although as we know, for anyone that's been following the Disclosure Project, as I have since at least May 2001, this testimony has already been substantially developed, going back.
Right, and I want to add that what has been added to our, let's call it, group of whistleblowers, which initially numbered, when I was doing things, providing information to the Clinton administration and the director of the CIA, was numbered only maybe a handful or a dozen. And by 1995 was a couple dozen at the Asilomar Retreat Center that we organized in '95 with a number of whistleblowers from different walks of life. That was a private gathering. And by the time we did the National Press Club event in 2001, we had several hundred. Now I have a list of pushing 1,000 names of people that I have information on or who I have debriefed. Many of them want to come forward. Some would be what I call uncooperating or hostile witnesses. But if they get a subpoena, they have to comply with the subpoena. And, it's not like they would have a choice. And some of the people on that list would be the who's who in the corporate and higher reaches of this hybrid military industrial entity that Eisenhower talked about, that I know for a fact have been involved. Let me give you one example. Although the offending party is dead, but not the person who was the victim. Back in the day when we were getting all this material, and this is the bombshell that you will see at the National Press Club event and at the conference on June 10th and 12th in Washington. A man who is a renowned Hollywood figure, who I will not name right now, was with the then soon ex-president, Bill Clinton, and another major celebrity in a limousine. And he asked about this issue. And the President Clinton said, and we have his written statement now, it came in on yesterday, that the president said, well, I was told just a little bit of information, but the former director of the CIA and former President George H.W. Bush approached him and said, this is none of your business. You're just the president, and you are not to look into this any further. And now that is headline news, what I just said. Now we have two witnesses to this that can be subpoenaed. One, the Hollywood figure, another, the celebrity star that he was working with. Now, why is that important? Because I knew at the time, and I was told explicitly, that the president wanted to pursue this, but that he was in fact waived off. And I eventually heard that he was not only waived off, but then induced through, let's call it briberies and what have you, to not further look into and pursue this matter. Now, this kind of corruption at the highest levels of the presidency, which has happened multiple times, I might point out, and other political figures, is also a crime. And you cannot turn to the president of the United States or a person fully vested on a oversight committee of the Congress and tell them you have no business to look into something that the taxpayers of the United States are paying for, and which is something of great import to the national security. I also want to point out that when you start looking at who all these top secret whistleblower witnesses are, that are in our list, these are being turned over to the key investigators for Congress, the White House, and the Pentagon. And so at the National Press Club, we're going to make it quite clear that the US government now has everything they need to pursue this and get to the bottom of it and correct this crisis. One of the other items that we would be clearly claiming, Derek, which I think is very important, in terms of who has standing, everybody in the United States of America who has been paying for oil, gas, and coal, or living with polluted air, or has had their economic fortune set back by the cost of those items, would also potentially be plaintiffs, which means 330 million people could be plaintiffs to this, in the sense that everyone who is currently locked in what we call the lost century, where these technologies, that movie is coming out June 6th, by the way, this documentary film, are really have been in a very real way victims. Our fortunes, our health, our prosperity, and our freedoms have been curtailed by an unelected, illegally run group of people who have viciously suppressed, through all means necessary, including confiscation and murder, technological breakthroughs that should have corrected these climate and pollution and poverty problems decades ago. So, this has the greatest significance to the national security and the future of not just the United States, but of course we're in America, so that's where we can prosecute this case, but in the world, every citizen of the planet. And I think that's where we have to begin to look at this in a very broad way. Now, what damages we might be claiming, because you mentioned that whatever damages are, the judgment can be treble or 3 times what they are. It would be almost incalculable. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, certainly it is the biggest legal story in human history, and the damages are almost incalculable. You cannot calculate the cost to human advancement, I think, that has come with suppression of these advanced energy technologies, propulsion technologies, which will solve definitively the global climate change crisis in our time, and could have done so decades ago had they not been suppressed. Part of the power, I think, of RICO is that the action can be filed both against the individuals involved in the criminal enterprise,
right,
or in the name of the criminal enterprise itself. So it allows essentially for individual defendants to plead and hopefully secure their individual release should they, believe that they were acting in such a way that was without knowing criminal intent. By which I mean individually defendants can plead that they were acting with what they thought was legitimate authority coming from the president or coming from the Congress, and not sort of derived from this extra constitutional group that we know for a fact exists at this point, and we can prove in a court of law exists and has existed for decades on this issue.
One of the key people we would be deposing and providing subpoenas to, by the way, we've talked about this, Derek, or what I call the inverse witnesses. They're the people who've been involved with the projects, but there were the people who legally, constitutionally had a need to know, who were denied access, like the president, or were threatened or were bought off and bribed. And I have an extensive list of these people. These are people who, under any interpretation of the Constitution, would absolutely have been read in or briefed on these projects. And this would include the president, the key members of the oversight committees of the Congress, and I might add, in the case of the CIA director I briefed, who was also denied access, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, General Patrick Hughes, who was denied access and pushed aside, and in the case of the head of Intelligence Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson, who, when he made inquiries, was not only denied information, but was overtly threatened. So those are all people who can be subpoenaed to make the case that the projects in question are, in fact, a priori, illegally run and unconstitutionally run. And this, just so everyone knows, this is the foundation of the Disclosure Project, which we formed in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And legally, let me just summarize this to you. If you go to our website or look at the book Unacknowledged, there is a document. It's what we call the UNOD document. It's unless otherwise directed. And my military advisor said, Dr. Greer, what you need to do before you go public and bring these people forward who will be talking outside their coerced and illegally obtained non-disclosure agreements and security oaths, is to write a memo to all the main agencies of the United States government, send it return receipt requested, which we have and can prove, it's in our archive, that stated in summary, you can read it, but I will summarize it, basically said, through meetings that we have taken with key constitutional figures in the United States government, we have discovered that the operations connected to UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and related energy technologies are being run unconstitutionally and illegally. Therefore, The non-disclosure agreements which people sign, the security oaths that they've been threatened with are all null and void. They're vitiated. They're negated by the fact that those people didn't know that they were working under an illegal RICO, an illegal organized crime syndicate. They thought that it was something where the top down had been overseen properly by the president and Congress, and we know that this is not true. So basically, that's how I convinced the first tranche or group of Disclosure Project witnesses to come forward. But even to this day, because of witness intimidation and the threats of people losing their pensions and the threats of what have you, this is a problem. And it extends well into the corporate sector. I want to make something very clear here. For example, there's a man who's been reaching out to me through an interlocutor for a while, who is the chairman of a major Fortune 100 company. If I said the company's name, everyone on this call would know it instantaneously. And this man, who's elderly now, wants to come forward, but since his folks started talking to me, he and his entire family threatened. Now, this is where, and by the way, this man has the documents and proof of this major corporation possessing these technologies we are talking about. And he feels terrible and has deep regret that the world and the humanity is in the situation it is. And he wants to come forward. But through this gangland, thuggish, mafia style intimidation and criminal behavior, he is still very much on the fence and inclined not to. So this is a serious problem for disclosure. And it goes from the presidency and Congress all the way through the captains of industry and corporations. So my view of this is that this is not speculation. This is not a frivolous action. This would be based on enormous amounts of direct evidence and direct witness testimony. We have 1,000 times what most murder trials need to convict someone of murder, literally. So this is why this action is so important if, there's a big if while we're standing up this process, the United States government, meaning the White House and the Congress, finally do what they have been recommended since 1993, when I wrote the first sets of recommendations for the president and then later for members of Congress that I had briefed, like members of the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Government Reform Oversight Committee. All of these people I briefed. And let me point out also, in these meetings with senior members of Congress on relevant committees, every single one of them were denied access to these projects, whether they're Senate Intel, Armed Services, House Government Reform and Oversight. Even the chairman of the House Government Reform and Oversight that I met with in the 90s flat out told me he had never been told anything about this issue and had been denied actively information on it. So I think that all of this makes a solid, airtight case. If we can find a judge in the federal system that isn't also corruptible or corrupt. I mean, this is the $100 trillion if.
Yes, I think part of the power of a civilian directed civil lawsuit like this, the Disclosure Project legal team that would bring, is that the United States Attorney's Office can use any evidence that we gather as part of a civilian suit or a civil suit and developed, that including deposition testimony that's taken under oath, documents, etc. If we gain access to certain facilities, all of that evidence that we would develop in this burgeoning legal effort could be used to seek criminal indictment of any individuals who are seen as complicit with and knowing in their criminal intent along with this criminal enterprise.
But also the corporations can be criminally prosecuted, I understand.
Oh, yes, by all means. And they are, in many cases, the enterprise itself that's discussed by the RICO Act. Under the law, for the lawyers out there and who may be considering joining our efforts, we're doing a call out for, pro bono attorneys of every stripe. And there's going to be a link that folks can access posted below, that you
Right.
can sign up for, and we will get your name and information, as a number of years in practice, as well as credentials, and a statement of interest from you in working with the Disclosure Project legal team. But our hope is to have attorneys and boots on the ground in every single relevant jurisdiction for this
Right.
multi-pronged approach. Under the law, for the lawyers out there, under 18 USC 1961, the meaning of a racketeering activity is any violation of state statutes against murder, extortion, robbery, dealing in controlled substances, which are related to this issue, although a little bit more tangentially than the environmental aspects of it, counterfeiting, theft, embezzlement, fraud, as well as criminal copyright infringement and intellectual property theft, which is central to this case, going all the way back to the time of Nikola Tesla in 1943, in my estimation.
Right.
A
Absolutely.
lot of his later work and final work was seized directly from him in 1943. It is 20 missing trunks are still unaccounted for to this day of his work at the time. So there's a very fertile area in which we can develop through civil lawsuits in a multi-jurisdictional approach that's going to require the time and talent and dedicated expertise of a number of legal professionals in a number of different subject areas. And if you would like to join us, you can also send an email to disclosure.legal@gmail.com, and we will, one of our assembled project members will contact you and get more information about your particular areas of expertise, and any other relevant information that you can share with us that would assist us in bringing legal force to bear and enforcing the RICO statutes, specifically directed toward this longstanding secrecy, which has kept this story, the central story, the most important story in human history, from coming to wider acknowledgement, and I think is going to be extremely, extremely beneficial in the years and months ahead.
Yeah, it's the future of the planet is hanging in the balance, and it's not a exaggeration to say so. One thing I want to point out also, I believe the statute also includes things like money laundering.
Yes.
And let me comment on this, because in so many cases you follow the money. It's a cliche, but it's some real truth to it. And we have a coming forward at the National Press Club and at the two-day event, the 2 days before the National Press Club event on June 12th, on June 10th and 11th, a Marine who was with 5 of his platoon buddies, who came across a man-made alien reproduction vehicle about 300 feet in diameter, that's as big around as a football field, offloading illegal drugs and weapons in Indonesia in 2009. We have the names of his platoon buddies. He's coming forward. He has provided testimony officially to the Pentagon, and he will be there. Now, why is that important? Because we have other witnesses who come forward, including a man who worked at a black site CIA in Tennessee, who was also involved with that end of it, using these clandestine man-made UFOs, and involved heavily in moving vast quantities of contraband and drugs. Why? Because it creates an all-cash flow, which is untraceable, off budget, and is not even embezzled out of the black budget of the United States and Pentagon, but it's another revenue source. The men I've been talking to who were at Area 51 and Wright-Patterson, some of them have called the regular programs that do the reverse engineering and retrievals of extraterrestrial vehicles and what have you, the legacy programs from the 40s. But these rogue, what they call these rogue operations, are also going forward on a parallel basis and are much more out of control than even the legacy ones that are unconstitutional. And so what you have here is a multi-layered problem where there are extreme factions, let's call, that because of compartmentalization of operations and intelligence, many of the people who are innocently working in an underground base or in a secure compartmented information facility, they have no knowledge of these more extreme and murderous and criminal elements that are doing all the drug running and how the money is being created. We have a man who has contacted me who is working for a contractor at the Dugway Proving Grounds. And he was explicitly told that all transactions for the sector he was in, called Avery sector, Avery. By the way, all the names of all these bases, sectors, locations are coming out on June 12th. The whole world's going to see it. We're not holding anything back. Code names, code numbers, base locations, corporate names, all of it. So stay tuned. My point here is that he was told by an Air Force, a woman there, that all transactions for those activities were 100% in cash. Moreover, the corporate contractors on a U.S. covert base owned 52% of the operations, which created a means for them to maintain control over the technology and also not be subject to any FOIA requests or even, in many cases, oversight. So this, I said for 30 years, there's a hybridized entity, which Eisenhower called it the military-industrial complex. I want to be a little more specifics. It's a hybrid criminal organization that's part governmental, that's illegal breakaway, and part corporate private. But the dominant partner is private. It's where the money is. And so this is another key part of what we would be putting forward in the RICO action, because here we're talking about not only blatantly criminal activity that is covered under RICO, and now we have people to be subpoenaed who will testify, but we also can state that even people, for example, one of the key people that I'm working with in Washington literally oversees and manages the black budget of the United States, meaning the legal part of the black budget that's known by the president and the Congress, because there are highly classified items that are not enumerated that the public would ever know. However, this person and his bosses have never gotten access to the UFO UAP projects, but now they know they exist. So we know that this is being run illegally and unconstitutionally, but because of that, in the very first meeting I had with these folks in a secure facility, they said, "Where is the money coming from?" I said, "Well, let's take your B-2 stealth bomber that they built the government for $2 billion for. It probably costs more like $100 million once it was designed, as you know. But the other money, it goes out the back door, like a mafia operation where they have a pizza parlor and all kinds of ill-gotten gains go through the front door, and out the back is classic money laundering, but also embezzlement, in this case, of U.S. federal funds. And we have a witness who worked for SAIC who actually saw this happening also, the Science Applications International Corporation. So we're talking about a enormous, the world's largest RICO criminal organization is what we're talking about here. So we need serious legal help. And we're also, by the way, anyone listening, we're going to need serious funding help, because even if every lawyer worked pro bono, there are going to be some significant travel, deposition, transcripts, all kinds of other expenses that the attorneys would not be able to pick up unless they're extremely well heeled. And so we need also people who will underwrite this action.
It's part of the beauty of the RICO Act and the law in this area is that if we're successful in bringing this information in a convincing way, and that's ultimately decided by an everyday jury of everyday people, a civil jury, in terms of proclaiming very specific individual actors as well as the criminal enterprise to be racketeering influenced and corrupt, If that factual determination is made by a jury in the end, it allows for treble damages to anyone that's been harmed. And certainly you and your organization have been, greatly harmed going decades back. But as you point
Right.
out, we've all been harmed by suppression of these technologies.
Right.
But it allows for attorney's fees and costs as well
Right.
in being able to be recovered from these defendants. And so part of our legal strategy as we're developing it, I think, needs to be that we name individuals as defendants, but then we give them proper incentive to plead and to come clean that they did not know they were acting or failing to act without proper congressional authority or without proper executive branch oversight in the chain of command. And that allows their testimony then to be developed against the true principles of the co-conspirators at the top of the chain of command. And securing their release, we can secure their testimony and be able to prevail in the end by proving that this illegal shadow government exists and has existed for a long time. And it is just now when an everyday group of people, everyday citizens comes together and really pursues this in a court of law. We went to war in 2003 on far, far less evidence for weapons of mass destruction than exists developed by for UFOs and at this point as being extraterrestrial vehicles as the shadow government exists. We can prove it in court now. We have the testimony, we have the documents, we have the evidence, we have had for a long time. And I think we will prevail, but it's going to require everybody's efforts and a broad range of legal talent. So please click on the form link below, send us your information, and we will be in touch and contact as soon as possible. And I also wanted to ask you, Dr. Greer, your thoughts on amnesty to those who participated in these projects during the relevant periods, but may not have been knowing actors, in the sense that they didn't know that, perhaps they were violating the law, or perhaps they thought they were maintaining a secrecy oath that had actual executive branch authority behind it. If you may comment on that aspect.
Well, actually, those people are they're innocent victims, actually, that were just let's call it a cog in the machine. Right. And they didn't know who was cranking and running the machine. Right. They're already protected under the law that was passed for people to come forward, that was signed 2 days before Christmas 2022. And that's the basis of the witnesses that we're bringing now and bringing forward. However, separate from that, we are recommending, and I recommended this back in when Clinton was president, that there be amnesty for the culpable parties who did know. Why? Because if you're going to actually get these very high value senior folks to, let's say, defect from this criminal group, those whistleblowers who do have culpability need to have amnesty. So I am actively working and discussing 3 key things that need to be enshrined in an amendment or a bill in Congress. One is amnesty that you're talking about for a period, not a long period, might be a year or less. The other would be explicit protection of people's financial assets and or pensions, which have been threatened and are actually specified in some of these NDAs that people have signed illegally. They didn't know they were signing on behalf of an illegal operation, however. And the other is federal witness protection for ones who feel they need it. And this is a significant number of them. Now, as a private organization, unless we had a very large endowment, we would not be able to backstop and guarantee people's pensions, nor would we be able to afford to have a tactical security team for all these hundreds of folks. Now, the federal government can. So that's why we are recommending, and you will see when I do my presentation at the National Press Club, there will be a set of recommendations for the executive branch and President, Department of Justice, and there'll be a set of recommendations for the Congress, which I am refining as we speak today. And those will be very much encouraged. And when in my private conversations with members of Congress and other people in Washington, I'm saying this very much needs to be done. But this is where we need the cooperation of the federal government for some of that. But luckily, the people with whom I'm speaking are extremely sympathetic to that and realize we need it. For example, let's go back to this very highly placed executive with a major corporation who has the documents and the proof of these technologies, which brought forward would end oil and gas and coal and pollution forever. This man obviously benefited greatly from the secrecy because he was head of this big corporation. He doesn't want himself or his family at risk, so he needs protection. But he also doesn't want his assets seized, which can be under RICO. So there needs to be a way to incentivize, because one of the things I tell attorneys and radically eyed all kinds of activists is that an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. And let's not forget, the group we're talking about have more money than the US government, better technology, more advanced technology by thousands of years from reverse engineering extraterrestrial vehicles. And they are vicious. They are thugs. So what you don't want to do is make an enemy where there's someone who wants to help you, right? Who is highly placed, very highly placed. So this is why a period of amnesty would be very important. And I think there'll be increasing political pressure to do that when they see that there's a credible civilian group like ours moving forward to take on both the corporate and governmental end of this. And I want to also say one thing that you and I haven't spoken about, Derek. There are people highly placed in other countries watching this. I've been on the phone with people in London. As you know, I've met with and briefed the ministers of defense of Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, all of whom could be supporting witnesses, not to the US situation, but in their own countries, where they similarly were denied access to these projects, notwithstanding the fact that they should have known. And this group we're talking about is transnational, it's global. And it's a global corrupt organization, not just US. So this is going to get watched, I'm quite sure, by other countries that are facing the same problem, but are sitting on the sidelines, waiting to see what happens in the United States, since the United States obviously is the center of power on most of these operations.
Yes, I think a lot of people have difficulty wrapping their heads around this idea of an illegal shadow government has been used, in the words of Senator Daniel Inouye during.
Oh yes, tell that. This is a wonderful story from when you were an intern up there.
Oh yeah, thank you for that's quite an interesting story. As we know, Daniel Inouye, one of the main individuals responsible during the Iran-Contra hearings for reining in Oliver North and his gang. But I think that was just the tip of the iceberg. And he's famous for saying, there exists a legal shadow government with its own army, its own air force, its own fundraising mechanisms, to paraphrase, free from the law itself and any sort of congressional oversight. And a lot of people suspect that he may have been speaking in hyperbole or exaggeration, but I know for a fact that he was not. And originally, when the original May 2001 Disclosure Project press conference was released, I was an intern in Capitol Hill for both Senators Bingaman and Domenici, the New Mexico delegation. And I watched attentively during that initial press conference. And I had the privilege of catching up with Senator Inouye in the summer of 2001 in the Senate Hart Office building as a young intern. And I approached him. I said, "Have you heard of the Disclosure Project? Have you heard of Dr. Greer and his efforts to bring about formal acknowledgments of UFOs and advanced technology?" And he said, he kind of did this to me and caused me to follow him back to his office, where I had a private meeting with the senator. And the senator confirmed to me directly that everything included in the May 2001 initial disclosure project press conference was real, was actually happening, that UFOs were extraterrestrial vehicles, that this issue has been obfuscated and concealed from the public for a number of decades, and that it was all, in fact, actual reality. He was not speaking in hyperbole. During the Iran-Contra hearings, the illegal shadow government has its own military. They have their own advanced technology. He was highly interested in getting to the bottom of this, but even senators like Senator Enaway, who never lost an election, have to be concerned with the 6-year election cycle in the Senate and the 2-year election cycle in the House. It's very hard, I think, for elected representatives, because of the giggle factor, because of everything, and the need to get reelected and the need to continue fundraising, to really get out in front of this issue. So the movement that we have seen lately has been tremendous, I think, for finally after all these years, and 22 years later, after Daniel Enaway confirmed to me personally that this was all a reality and not an exaggeration, I think is
I had forgotten that story until you mentioned it to me a few days ago. Because, I deal with so many people and situations like this where it's confirmatory to everything that we've been saying. And I think you're right. I think for most people, their minds just can't quite get their minds around the extent of the criminal and just the hubris and the outrageous operations that exist to have kept this secret, the counterintelligence, the threats, the inducements. I met with a member of this clandestine group back in 1993. Before I briefed the CIA director, and he said, look, we've given at least 10,000 people $10 million each or more to secure their cooperation with this secrecy. And in my case, General Albert Stubblebine, who had been head of Army intelligence and special forces, offered me in May of 1992 $2 billion to become part of his team and be on sort of a policy board. And it was all illegally ill-gotten gains from the collapse of the Soviet Union held in Eastern Europe, is what he told me. So the amount of corrupt money and activities globally on this is very substantial. But I think for the average person, and you make a very good point, one of the reasons we're doing, and this is why everyone listening, please send the link to the conference, the 2-day conference, the 10th, 11th, but the National Press Club event. That's going to be streamed by the National Press Club globally over our channels for free. Everyone can look at it. You should have all your members of Congress and your senators and everyone looking at it, because this is where we're going to unveil the disclosure intelligence archive that has all this information, the master list of witnesses. They'll be redacted in terms of people's private names that don't want to be known. But everyone who does want to be known will be on it. And as well as the entire collection of facilities, corporations, bases, project code names, et cetera, that we have. And every 2 or 3 days now, we are having to update that list. We have so much intelligence pouring in. So, I hope all of you, get involved with that. And the more information we have, the better. So we're asking for more whistleblowers to come forward and witnesses, or people with information that's specific information about locations of facilities, corporate projects, code names, code numbers, et cetera. Anyone with that information should contact us immediately, since now we're a little less than 3 weeks out from that event. The other thing I want to mention is that it's a very important strategy, this event in Washington, that is been asked of me by some senior folks in Washington, who cited exactly what you just said, Derek, that the politicians who have to get elected every 2 years or 6 years or 4, if you're the president, they are very skittish about the giggle and the little green men and the silliness factor of this subject. So the more we can put this kind of information out in front of the people, because they're politicians, and create enough social and political cover and demand that they act. So see, this is how things change. People don't understand. 30 years on of my activity doing this, it takes a long time. But also, if you look at the civil rights movement, that didn't happen overnight. That was percolating for decades. And even the Kennedy brothers did not want to do all the civil rights bills at the time. They thought it would be politically difficult. But when the civil rights activists, including but not limited to Martin Luther King and others, created a groundswell of public and media activity that put this on the front burner, then the Congress and the president acted. So what I tell people, having been involved, I'm old enough to have been involved in the early civil rights and rights for women and rights for gay people and rights for everybody, that and the being against the corrupt wars that we didn't need, that activity and the changes that flowed from it didn't come from the top down. It comes from the grassroots up, which is why it really is the power to the people and we the people. I live here down the road from Thomas Jefferson's home, Monticello. And that is what people need to understand. These things happen because you and I and other people who are concerned citizens exercise their Bill of Rights, their rights and civil rights to express themselves and take action, because that gives cover and support to the members of Congress who do want to act, but they need to hear from us. They need to know we are concerned about this. So I think this is the part of this that's very activist oriented. And it's not that I'm wanting to be a political agitator. It's that this is just simply how a democratic republic works. People do have to get elected. They do campaign. If we were able, should have a PAC or super PAC that would actually be the disclosure, that would be nonpartisan. And by the way, I want to emphasize, everything we're doing is nonpartisan, 100%, because some of the biggest supporters of disclosing this issue are equally divided on either side of the red, blue, left, right aisle. This issue, which I have made this point for 30 years, absolutely transcends the fracture lines of normal partisan politics. And thankfully, if you look at the letter sent to the Pentagon recently by 16 senators, that's 1/6 of the Senate, it's very bipartisan. It's from people from both sides of the aisle, which something this cosmic and global and of great importance should be. There should be complete nonpartisan approach to this.
As I know you're fond of saying, when the people lead, the leaders will follow. And I know we will keep the faith. And I certainly am one to believe that the force of law, the rule of law, regardless of political affiliation, and regardless of whatever has happened in the past and people's compromised values in the past, will cede to the ultimate truth on this issue. And even for senators like Inouye, who secured some of the initial funding, the secret Pentagon program, at least through the legal government, $22 million in 2007, working with Senators Reid and Senator Stevens. That also was a bipartisan approach that unfortunately sort of fell apart, at the time of Senator Inouye's death in 2012. But I do know that his particular views on this issue was that it is beyond any sort of red state, blue state considerations, that we're all
absolutely,
we're all in this together
absolutely
in the end.
Well, and remember, most people may have missed this when I did a YouTube about this a couple of years ago. I spoke to Senator Reid, who at the time was the majority leader of the Senate. His right-hand guy on that issue, the UFO issue, was a General Herbert, with whom I've spoken. And he and the senators didn't know that when they got influenced to put those $22 million into Bigelow Aerospace, that they were putting it into a cutout operation of this criminal activity. And what General Herbert said to me personally over and over again is that for the $22 million, they got nothing valuable back. They at the most, he had been an Army pilot. He said, basically, I got a snapshot from 40,000 feet, which anyone who would have read any UFO book from the Above Top Secret with Timothy Good or anything else from the 80s would have had more information. And he said, and I told him, I said, yes, because the person who was the consigliere and the architect of that project for Mr. Bigelow is a very well-placed member of this criminal operation. And he didn't know that. And so what people need to understand, we have to be very careful about this. Just because the Congress authorizes or the president authorizes an investigation, like there is now at Arrow, this office at Pentagon, doesn't mean it's clean, doesn't mean it's actually scientific, doesn't mean it has to be overseen. And given the corrupting influence and money and power and threats of this criminal organization, we have to assume that they will be compromised. That's what happened to Senator Inouye's and Reed's and Stevens's initiative. That money, what I said to General Herbert was, visualize this. You open the toilet lid, dump $22 million into it and hit the flush button. That's what happened. And so if it had been $22 billion, it would have been the same dynamic. So having, this is the sort of information that also goes into a RICO. Mm-hmm. Because this general and everyone involved in that's $22 million in taxpayer money. Exactly. That was essentially taken under false pretense and thrown away, totally thrown away.
Again, money laundering, directly one of the enumerated crimes
absolutely.
under RICO.
Yep.
That we can directly prove in a court of law now through deposition testimony, through live testimony, through in-court proceedings. I'm hopeful that the rule of law will once again, prove to be a force for change and good, and it's going to take civilians, it's going to take civil lawyers of all stripes and capacities. So please get in touch with our assembling legal team. One of our volunteers, pro bono attorneys, paralegals, law students, and all other individuals with any sort of connection with the legal profession should get in touch with us at the links provided as part of this video. And one of our team will be in touch with you, and we are very excited to work with you and to bring your specialized areas of expertise on board, because this is certainly a story and a legal initiative that is far beyond the capacities of any single attorney or any single, group of legal professionals beyond, just a single jurisdiction or a single mindset or set of expertise. So I think we need to assemble everybody from intellectual property law, patents, related litigation, civil rights law, constitutional rights. We also need criminal defense for alleged violations of non-disclosure agreements, secrecy oaths, that sort of thing, related clearances. Everybody with expertise in this area should contact us immediately. If you have experience serving in the House and Senate Foreign Intelligence, Foreign Relations Committees, Energy and Natural Resources Committees, oversight committees of all sorts, please get in touch with us. And of course, anything having to do with advanced energy, electrogravitics, and related technologies, laws, and policies. Again, our email address that's been established by our team, disclosure.legal@gmail.com. Please include your full legal name and all relevant contact information, your interest in working in the subject area, your states in which you're licensed to practice law, your current resume, if you can upload that through our form link, and one of our team members will be in touch with you in short order. Thank you very much.
I'd like to, I want to thank you, Derek, for heading this up. I'm sort of pulled in 1,000 directions every day, but I've always wanted to do this, and thank you for taking your time to head this up and help organize it. And all those of you who respond, I want to thank you in advance, because if we don't have the rule of law, then we're in the jungle. And so, if we want to go forward as a civilization, we not only need to have this matter truthfully disclosed and the technologies brought forward, but we also need to live under the rule of law. Otherwise, what are we? We're living under some sort of undisclosed totalitarian or authoritarian criminal group. Really? I mean, so this gets into really some basics of, as a civilization, as a people in America, how we want to go forward and to correct a big mistake that happened under Eisenhower's watch, because he took his eye off the ball a bit in the late 1950s. And so we have now, whatever it is, 65 years of this entire matter being run very much illegally and criminally. And that needs to be corrected. We need to correct this problem. And that is part of how we, the documentary coming out is called The Lost Century and How to Reclaim It. But this is part of how we reclaim it. It's not just the technology and the energy, it's the reestablishment of the trust of the people and the rule of law and our government of and for and by the people being properly run. I also want to emphasize that all you military and office holders have taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so I think we have to remind ourselves, those with that who took those oaths, whether they're a politician or someone who's a cabinet level person or someone who's been in the military or the government, that is something that everyone should begin to take very seriously on this matter. And now that we can prove and establish that these projects were run criminally, even though 99.9% of everyone involved didn't know that. I mean, I've spoken to Navy SEALs and Delta Force people and people at Area 51, and they were just doing their job in a compartmented operation. They had no idea the Congress and the president were not read in and didn't know, or that even senior flag officers at the Pentagon were being denied access and threatened. They didn't. How would they? This has been, quite frankly, my task and job, is to get to that level and the bottom of it. And this is something that I learned in December of 1993, when I laughed out loud when the person setting up my meeting for the CI director for Bill Clinton said, they made inquiries and can't get any information on this. I said, this cannot be true. I'm a young doctor. I was like, I don't know how old you are now, but I was like 37 or something. And I go, this is not possible. And then I found out, in fact, it was possible. And that's how the system had been run for a very long time, for 40 some years before I went into that briefing. And so I think that we have to understand that this is not just an academic exercise. This has real consequences to the future of our planet and to the United States of America and to humanity, that this gets resolved in a peaceful manner. And that's why we want this to be very clear. We are not looking to have anything that is some violent uprising. We're looking to do this and unwind this through a peaceful, legal means, both by our actions as a civilian operation and project, but also through the Congress and the White House. It can be done, but it's going to take a lot of coordinated effort, our RICO effort, the Congress's effort, and I think ultimately the cooperation of the media. And so my last appeal would be people who have contacts in the major media who they can send this YouTube link to should do so, because I think they're going to find there's some very newsworthy information here. So again, thank you guys. I know we got to run, but until next time, and thank you, Derek, and everyone you're working with, and Paige and others.
Thank you, Dr. Greer, and I look forward
Thank
to
you.
seeing you June 12th at the National Press Club.